What would you like to see first? What kind of story are we telling here?
It wasn't a total endorsement of being a lawbreaker or an outlaw. That was a component of what had to happen because that's the way the culture rolled. And that's the way the culture still rolls. Wally Parks and Bob Peterson and just so many of the names that you see in hot rodding today ran the dry lakes. As that became more popular, the activities on the streets also became more popular. You had fellas returning from the various military conflicts, and they would come back and they were restless and they had money and they would strip down a car and they would go racing. The first recognized drag strip in Southern California was Santa Ana drag strip, and that was at the Santa Ana airport. And a fellow named J.C. Hart was the manager, and he was from the South, and he arbitrarily established the distance at a quarter of a mile because that's the distance quarter horses ran when he grew up. J.C. was probably considered the father of modern drag racing. He teamed up with a fellow named Wally Parks. Wally Parks was the National Hot Rod Association.
There's limits, there's rules, there's this, there's that. Street racing, there's no rules. You show up with what you got and you go race the other guy with what he's got. And half the time you're hustling. There's a lot of hustling going on. Sometimes there's no hustle. It's an all-out race.
But it's very important to make the distinction that not all drag racers are street racers, but all street racers are drag racers.
Racing has more to do with people than it has to do with cars. You have the Olympics. What's the purpose of the Olympics? It's competitiveness. Street racing is something that happens because it's an alternative because going racing gets too expensive. Nobody really cares about getting people off the street. They care about making a dollar. And that's the biggest problem you have with what's going on today.
In racing, especially in the street or doing it on a legal racetrack, there's really no black, white, especially with Big Willie and Tomiko. Everybody is a brother as far as motorsports are concerned. And we didn't see the difference that I'm Asian or this guy's white or this guy's Mexican American, whatever. None of that really exists. We just love cars and we just end up racing each other.
Because see, the bottom line is that, since you're going to tell a story, let's start off with one important thing about it.
Los Angeles, California, the district called Watts. 34 persons die, $40 million worth of property is destroyed, almost 4,000 are arrested. The American Negro, the invisible man, breaks out in a scream, "Look at me, look at me. Know me for what I am. Look at me if you can."
I returned home in '66, it was a year after the Watts riots. And so the main reason we were organized by the Los Angeles Police Department was because we brought together in the Watts area white, black, brown, and yellow people racing. And so that's when the Los Angeles Police Department got the idea of let's organize this. That makes sense. Racing bring people together and nobody really care what color you are. And so he said, well, this Big Willie. And the reason that I became Big Willie because of the Los Angeles Times.
And I had read the article about Big Willie and the street racers. And I had seen some of the street racer jackets at the street racer lot in Van Nuys. And And I knew that Willie was the manager of the Broadway Gym in South Central. And so I loaded up and headed down to South Central. And I walked into the Broadway Gym and I said, "Hi, I'm Stan. And this is what I did in the Valley. And here's the problem." And Willie said, "You know, I've got the same problem." And we decided that we were going to work together.
And that was it. The general manager of the harbor, he told me over his dead body that I would get Terminal Island. I said, "I'm a Christian and I'm not going to kill you for no racetrack."
As far as we are concerned, Big Willie's application for the use of Reeves Field has been denied.
I said, "Mayor Bradley, the general manager of the harbor told me over his dead body, and I told him I'm not going to kill him, and so, you know."
I think it's a great idea. It provides not only an opportunity to give these youngsters an outlet, but it helps build brotherhood. They are built upon the theme of brotherhood through street racing.
Everybody understand that? Let me hear. Now, what we are trying to produce? All right.
So that was it. That was the beginning of Terminal Island.
There's never a fight, there's never a disagreement. Everybody just gelled together and raced each other, had fun.
I was 16 years old and somebody said there's a place that people street race out on out by the ocean and it's illegal. And we said, yeah, right. So they dragged us down there and sure enough, there was a street sign, there was a starter and there was a street, literally what looked like a street, and they're racing and it was the track. And it was the most amazing place I'd ever seen. And people from all walks of life were there. You met General Motor executives as well as gangbangers there. Everybody was there. They all showed up and people raced all day and all night.
74 all the way to 1995. This is the deal that Mayor Bradley made with the Harbor Department. If you need the property for harbor business, you know, which is fishery, navigation, the basic for Los Angeles Harbor, then Willie will close his track, and then when the land is available, then he'll come back and reopen. So we got to be in the Guinness World Book of Records for the racetrack that's closed and open the most.
That was a track for people. Man, it was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 3 days. They got Honda guys. I mean, the whole world was there. It was a place to be. For that thing to go down like that, who knows how, you know, why? They should never get rid of that track.
There's no money in brotherhood. Whatever they made was really small, and it really didn't bring back anything to the city, so that was the end of that.
The Bonneville Salt Flats started, if I'm not mistaken, they started actually racing cars out there and timing cars out there in like 1914. So this has been going on a long time, and at that time it was a necessity. You really didn't have other good options. Obviously that's not true anymore, but at the time it was, and it's stayed true all these years. It's still the only place you can go and test cars the way they test them today at 500 and 600 miles an hour. Because of how big it is, how flat it is, how smooth it is. And it's become a huge American tradition, really. Well, it became, obviously, especially in the late 40s, street racing became a serious problem in Southern California. There was, Southern California was a wide open area at that time. And there was a lot of places where young drivers wanted to test the limits, and it was becoming a big problem. And frankly, it's still a problem today. But in that area, it was a major problem. And so there grew a need, and Wally Park saw a need to find a way to give them another option, to do it in a actual sports competition, sanctioned environment, controlled environment, to do it where they could do it without risk to themselves, and do it in a legal fashion. All these things were part of his reason to found the NHRA and part of the reason that it grew so quickly because there was more and more people trying to take their car to the limits. And this wasn't just true in Southern California, but this is where it started, and it was probably where it was the most pronounced. And a way to get them off the streets and do it in an environment where they could still test the limits of their car, but to do so in a legal fashion and to do so in a controlled environment against other people. And it was all about competition, really. You know, since the beginning, the core principles of the NHRA have not changed, and that is to be able to test cars to the limit in a controlled environment, priority being safety as it always has been, doing it in a legal fashion. And from the very beginning, that's why it started. That's the principles today. It will always be the principles of the NHRA. Of course, now it's grown into a gigantic sanctioning body, the biggest in the world and most successful in the world. But it hasn't changed really, other than the fact that now the rules are much more uniform, where they weren't at the start. There were so many different options for people at different locations that had to be brought in, where everyone would do things in the same way, in the same rules. And that is the case today, but it wasn't in the early days. So the core principles really have not changed, and I think that's a big reason for the NHRA's success. Well, both Parks and Peterson were huge auto lovers, and they are legends today among auto enthusiasts all over the world. And they both loved cars. They loved to see how they could make them cooler, how they could make them go faster. And as part of the hot rod era back in the middle of the 20th century, they were leaders in this field. And they also both wanted to find ways to make people do it in a legal environment and make people do it as safely as possible. But Peterson started Hot Rod magazine, which Wally Parks helped him to do, and Wally Parks became the first editor-in-chief of that magazine, among other magazines that were started by Peterson. Eventually, Wally left because he was so involved in starting the NHRA in the early 1950s when he became president of the NHRA that he founded. He didn't have time to do both anymore, but these two men remained very good friends all their lives.
You know, one of the places to race was San Fernando Road. This is in Southern California, in the San Fernando Valley. It's already a hotbed of hot rodding. And this was a secluded road under a freeway overpass, no street lights there, had a stripe for the starting line, a stripe for the finish line. And I remember the first time my brother took me out there. He had just got his driver's license. I was still 15. And to see cars lining both sides of the road and this nighttime illegal activity, there was a huge air of excitement to that. I know many people could argue there's cool things about street racing and there's cool things about organized drag racing. Street racing, that atmosphere is kind of tough to beat. It's nighttime, it's not well lit. There's that air of the police could show up at any time and that excitement. And there's that spontaneity of you could choose off any particular person, make a wager on it, and in 3 minutes find out who has the better car. On the drag strip side of things, it's organized. You can get into the lanes. You can make a certain number of runs per day. You can have a pit area to go maintain your car. You've got restrooms. You've got snack bars. You can sit there and watch nonstop other cars compete. They both have some pluses to them. I think there's a lot of different personalities that get into racing. So if you take street racing, I think a lot of people that do it, it's all about ego. Big heads, they want everybody to see just how cool they are. Social media's enabled them to do that on an even wider scale. And I think with some of the people, it's almost exactly the opposite. They have zero self-confidence, and so they portray it through their race car and try to make it where they feel more accepted because of what their car does. For me, I don't know that it was ever about me. I think it was always about the car. I think the ability to take a chunk of 3,500 pounds of steel and rubber and chrome and do things to it with your own hands and then go out there and prove whether that was successful or not. I think it was the challenge of that, not the ego part of that drove me.